So good afternoon, everybody. This is Scott Shealy with the Lancaster County Agriculture Council. I'd like to welcome you to this webinar on the effects of COVID-19 pandemic on agriculture in Lancaster County. Lessons learned is really going to be our focus today. And the Lancaster County Agriculture Council has been celebrating Ag Week in Lancaster County this week. And this is one of our key presentations in relation to in particular, things that are of interest to farmers. And what we hope to do today is summarize and drill down in terms of some of the detail of what the council put into a report to Recovery Lancaster, which includes the Lancaster County Commission, the Lancaster Chamber, and the Economic Development Company of Lancaster County. So that report was presented last night. We are now out in the press with this, and we basically have structured this event today to do three things. One, a very quick review of what the findings are of the report. Again, no detail, but I'll be doing that here in just a couple of minutes. We also have had the support of many of our local producers, people in the ag business, who have told us a little bit about their story in terms of what's happened over the last 6 months. And we have a number of people who will share that with you as part of our first panel. And then we've asked a number of folks who are what I would consider to be subject matter experts to follow up that panel with a little bit more in terms of what the industry is experiencing, giving us a broader view of how what we see in Lancaster County has fit into things that are going around the state and the region and the nation for that matter. So that's our agenda for today. And, our commitment is to try to have you out of here no later than 1:30. We'll do some questions and answers at the end, and we'll see how we go. So again, thanks for being here today, and we appreciate your support. Let me just say that if I were to sum things up in terms of the report, there are three main findings that come out of the report. And again, a lot of this is based on the experience of our people here locally, that in many ways, people have, during the pandemic, have pivoted toward what we're calling direct selling. So, trying to find local channels for distribution, selling directly, in some cases selling directly to consumers. We see that this trend toward direct selling is one of the ones that has come out of the last 6 months. I mean, the big question remains, so is that going to continue? Will that, be something that we'll see going forward? And that's something that our subject matter experts may want to address as they come on the line. We also saw that that people who had already diversified actually had a little bit easier time if they had diversity in their product lines, if they had diversity in their distribution channels. So people with a plan had a plan. So that's a good thing. But we also saw people who did it on the fly. And that's been very interesting. And again, you'll hear some people locally here who have stories about that and can give us a little bit of an insight of what that might have been like. And then the other main finding is that obviously for people that had consumer-facing operations, just how to deal with the restaurants needing to be closed, how to deal with alternatives with that. People involved in agritainment, how did they deal with it when spring came around and it became time to open up? And, I think, again, we have some people who are on the call. I think that's George Hurst, and he's having trouble getting on. I'll get back to him. But, I think that, we also see some other things that are going on. We didn't really highlight those. You'll see them in the report if you take a look at it. But I mean, one of the things that we also said was mainly as an observation, but not so much a finding, that many of the problems that we had before the pandemic, we had during the pandemic. In some cases, it was made worse. In other cases, it wasn't. So, I mean, I think that was kind of an interesting learning. I think that we learned, just how fragile the ag and food system is. That many of us, think about what we do in terms of the particular part of the system, that the role that we play there. But the system itself is interrelated. That when one piece of the system goes down, the rest of the system, there's a ripple effect, and we have to kind of keep that in mind too. And I think the Ag Council really has an interest in seeing that we think more broadly about the ag and food system. The other one that, again, you'll see highlighted in the book, we didn't, bring it out here in terms of main findings, but this has really brought a real focus on the agriculture and food workforce. That, I mean, look how much of the, supply chains were brought down by the fact that meat processors had to change the way that they actually did the business itself, more space, more PPE, that kind of thing. That became a big issue with the big guys. So, I think it kind of brought a focus to that, and that we need to deal with that in some way or another. And then just another one to mention is, again, kind of another one. There's many of the people that we talked to in agribusiness who told us, yeah, we're working from home and we're probably not going to go back to the office. We're going to let our lease expire at the end of its term. Many people have kind of said that this actually works for us, and that, we're going to go for there. So that's, again, just a preview. We have the report that's available. I'll put my the address for the Ag Council in the chat box. But what I would ask is, as we get through this and we hear from our two panels, try to put if you have questions, try to put them in the chat box. And then that'll get us started when we come back after the two panels are finished. And we can start with those as the first questions we go to. Okay, so thank you very much for that. So this question of, what happened, I think is a really big deal. And, we had a number of people who talked to us about what their experience was. Many of them are on the line here. I'd like to just kind of move through them a little bit. One of the things that Andrew Bollinger taught me was that not everybody was affected so much by the pandemic. Andrew, are you on, and can you pick it up from here?
Yes, I'm on. Can you hear me?
We can.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. I am a partner in Meadow Spring Farm. It's a family-owned dairy farm, and we have about 475 adult dairy cows and farm about 650 acres. We do that with the help of 3 full-time and about 20 part-time employees. Our milk is sold, we wholesale it raw to Clover Farms in Reading, Pennsylvania. And so leading up to the pandemic, the last quarter of 2019, the first 2-3 months of 2020 here was probably some of our strongest milk prices in the last 4 years. Average price was a strong $19, if not a little bit over that. And we were able to make a modest profit at that price. So when the pandemic first hit, I would say the biggest problem was supply chain disruptions, just like about everybody else that was producing some sort of a commodity product. With schools shutting down and restaurants closing, that's where I'm not sure exactly what percentage of Clover's milk went there, but a lot did. Initially, they saw an increase in demand in sales of milk because everybody rushed to the grocery stores, kind of like the whole snowstorm effect. But then all of a sudden, everybody must have bought enough for 2 weeks because their plant just filled up with milk and there was nowhere for it to go. So they did, for the first time in their history of bottling milk, they had to ask all of their producers to dump 2 days worth of product. And, that was, I don't know, it's a heartbreaking thing as a dairy farmer to basically, we haul our own milk with our own truck, but this load went right in our manure spreader and was deposited into our manure tank. And that was first time that ever had to happen. Now I say that while that was very rough for us, I do realize that there were other shippers of milk, other dairy farmers that had to dump a whole lot more than that. Depending on where their milk was going, it was a very rough 3 to 4 weeks. And again, it just seemed like, if there's something I think we learned out of this, it was that our supply chain is fragile, and it was not able to convert to packaging different directions or send product different ways on short notice. So, I mean, with all that going on, it did drop the price of milk by 25 to 30% for a month or two. Since then, the price has rebounded. That is partly due to things, the supply chain getting figured out. It's partly due to different milk co-ops putting production limits on, which is another thing that dairy farmers are needing to learn to adjust to. Like we've always been taught that to be more and more to make more profit, we need to increase our milk per cow. That's always been what we push for through science, through better health of the cows, caring for them better. And all of a sudden, you have to change your mindset a little bit because there's a lot of co-ops that are limiting. If you produce over a certain amount of milk, they based it off of your previous production history. And if you produce over that amount, they dock you or just pay a very small amount for that amount of milk. So that's been new for a lot of farms here in our area. Another boost, though, through this whole thing has been, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't finish that point. Part of the reason that the milk price has also rebounded is the USDA's farm to table program. I can't say this for everyone, but we have heard recently that a number of clients of Clover Farms that they bottle for have picked up contracts through this farm to table program. And I know Clover's demand for milk right now is the highest it's been probably even pre-pandemic. Things are really clicking at their dairy. So, I don't know how long that program continues. I know it's through the end of the year and I believe into somewhat of next year, but that has definitely been a boost to the dairy industry. And then, of course, the CFAP payments that have been available to multiple farmers of all kinds of crops and commodities being produced has been a big boost to specifically the dairy industry, to those who have signed up for that program. So that was our trip through the pandemic. I mean, it seems like now, it's not too bad, but in thinking about what I was going to say last night, it did kind of take me back a couple months, and there was definitely a lot of uncertainty, and it was kind of a scary time. And we do know that we were very close to having to dump milk again because there was just nowhere for it to go. But thankfully, our dairy was able to work its way through that and find a home for it. So that's what I would have at this time, Scott.
Yeah, thank you, Andy. George Hurst, are you able to be on the line?
Yes, Scott, I'm on.
Okay, so George is our next speaker, and George is in a little bit different situation with regard to dairy. He'll tell you more about it, but he's connected in with their own processing. But George, can you give us kind of an overview of what you guys experienced here over the last 6 months?
Sure. Overall, it's been challenging, but also there was some rewards in the whole time of during those challenges, some opportunities. Because we downsized our dairy a year ago, we only have enough of cows for what we retail here at our own store. So consequently, dumping milk and having to participate in that or not where knowing where our milk is going to go was not an issue for us. The issue we are running some beef cattle right now, nothing to do with the dairy industry. We're running some beef cattle in our barn. We also did last year during the pandemic, and we had a couple pot loads that needed to go, and there was no place to go with them. Consequently, we cut the feed back. Consequently, they got too heavy. By the time the processors were able to take them, they were overweight, and we did take a pretty good hit on that. Back to our retail and processing, we were processing a lot of milk at night for local Blessings of Hope. They had access to a bunch of farmers' milk that was going to be dumped, and they got a quick permit from Harrisburg. We really applaud some of the people and at Harrisburg that just said to Blessings of Hope, go ahead and do it. You might not have all the permits that you need. So we did process milk that did go out to a lot of homes in our community, but also much broader than that. Blessings of Hope is a large charity food collection agency, and that distributes food in a lot of areas. So we're there for a couple weeks. Ourselves, I think there was another place that was processing milk for them. They brought volunteers in to help in the plant, and as we packaged it, processed it, they loaded on their trucks to distribute. The thing that we did have to watch, but we were okay, we had to shut down for a little bit, is during this time, plastic jugs were hard to get. Which was a challenge for a little bit. The suppliers weren't running full speed ahead, and it was also taking a lot more plastic jugs around the country. We had to slow up and actually wait a couple of days for a shipment so we could pick up our shipment of plastic jugs. In the retail end of it, even in our own milk, on the retail side, we had to limit the amount of milk that went out. We went down to a gallon per customer there for a couple of days. We didn't have enough. We couldn't get enough in, even though there was milk being dumped. Ahead of that, there was a really short supply. Eggs is the same way. We know there was a lot of surplus eggs around. We could not get them into the store, so we were limited down to 2 dozens that was going on for about 2 weeks, where we had to limit some of those commodities. Overall, on the production end of the farm, then we did not feel as much as a lot of other dairy farmers, because in light of the fact that we're able to retail most of our own milk. I think that's about the highlight of for now, Scott, unless there's some questions later on, be glad to answer that.
Yeah, thanks, George. And again, put your questions that you might have in the chat box. We'll come back to those as we work through. One of the other things that we saw was that if you had animals that you needed to take to market and take to slaughter, very quickly, those opportunities filled up. And Mike Smucker is with Smucker Meats in Mount Joy. Mike has a story. He's one of the most popular guys around. Mike?
Yeah. Not by choice. It just happened to be the way things worked out this year. Yeah. our schedule has typically been full throughout the year when we start the year, so there wasn't anything drastically different with that. We noticed there might have been a slight decrease at the beginning of the year throughout the rest of the year, but by the time things started shutting down the end of March, beginning of April, our schedule it filled up quick, and we were overbooked have been overbooked pretty much for the remainder of this year, and so trying to navigate the challenges of who do you say yes to and who do you say no to, and trying to keep as many people happy as you can has been probably our biggest challenge. I say that recognizing that there's a lot of people that have really struggled through this, and it's been a struggle for us. However, it's been in somewhat the opposite direction, and just trying to manage how we can handle all of the work that's available to do. We've settled into a new normal, trying to increase production and become more efficient at what we can do, so that we can try to move more through and, do a little bit extra here and there. Again, at this point, for us, it's not really trying to do more so that we can gain more. We understand the key piece of the puzzle that we play in all of this, and just trying to be available to customers that are trying to direct market their livestock. So that's still a focus of ours, something that we're trying to manage as best we can. Right now, we're in the process of working on our schedule for 2021, and it's something we need to do. We've sat down a couple times and worked through some of it, and then after a while, you just kind of scratch your head and you're like, I can't do this anymore, because you look at all the people that we're going to have to either call up and say, I can't do it, or you wanted to bring this much and we can only do this much. And the other part is, how much of the numbers that people are requesting right now is it real? We understand that there's a certain amount of people that are looking and hoping to increase business now and in the future, but in reality, what will that end up being? We're not charging, or we're not reserving spots on our schedule for people, so they're not prepaying or anything like that. And there's very clear reasons for why we're not doing that. But at the same time, when it comes down to it, and they have cattle scheduled, and we get to the week of, and those cattle or hogs come off, that's the part that we are left with, trying to manage with. Okay, how real are the numbers that people are requesting? We don't want to say no to people that really have the work, that really have a demand and the market for their products. But it's not an easy question to ask, because you ask everyone, and sure, yeah, I've got a market for this, and I'm going to bring it in, and I'm not going to go back and question or look at, okay, what's your business plan, or all that kind of stuff. We're not in that kind of setting, but at the same time, it's really kind of managing how we can best predict what people are going to bring. Right now, the best prediction that we can do is kind of look on past history. So what we're doing is we're looking back on what people have either brought so far this year, or they brought this time last year, and kind of basing our schedule off of that. So we're kind of starting our base schedule off of what did people already bring, and if someone wants to increase it, we'll fit a little bit in, but we're not going to be able to. If they want to double their schedule, it's not really going to work the greatest. We're not going to be able to fit that in. So yeah, our story's been a little bit different, but still a challenge all the same, in just trying to keep people happy right now. So,
And Mike, you are one of the few USDA approved facilities. You might be the only one in Lancaster County.
to my knowledge, we're the only one that's doing fee for service. Well, no, I think there's another one down in Kinzers or Gap, I think, that does some, but I'm not sure. We're one of maybe 2 or 3 inspected processors in Lancaster County. So,
yeah. So again, that has caused a crunch as well.
Yes.
Good. Okay, thanks for sharing. So Jack Coleman is on the line, and Jack has a interesting story about a diversified business that he runs. One piece of that is in agritainment, and we asked Jack to say a few words about what he's been through the last 6 months as well. Jack? You're muted.
How about now?
There you go.
Okay, so fortunately, we are very diversified. So we have contract chickens with Tyson. That didn't really change anything. We have production crops. The commodities were a little lower, but not terrible. We have a soybean oil business for dust control. That didn't change a whole lot, but the agritainment was very challenging. Of course, we were all geared up, ready to start, and then come, the end of May, beginning of June, we're in a lockdown. So what do we do? So you kind of got to think out of the box a little bit. So we decided to drive people through our property. We advertised it on social media. We actually had timed sessions, times that they could come, so they didn't all come at once, to pick up some of our signature items that we made, like kettle corn, cider donuts. Maybe 1 week it was fresh squeezed lemonade. So they would come through, they would drive through the property. We even made a game out of it where it was like an I Spy game or a scavenger hunt, where they would pick out different things at the property. They could play a game with their kids in the car. Some people, when they came up to get their product, they would open their window, we'd hand it to them in a bag. Some of them would open their trunk, they would stick it in. So it varied. People enjoyed it so much, they went around 2 or 3 times. So what we learned from it was, hey, there's an opportunity here for some e-commerce that we really didn't do. So I think that's true for all of us in Lancaster County. With the Lancaster County brand that we have, it's easier to sell product elsewhere to other people. So we should take advantage of that. And so that's what we learned.
Yeah, that's great, Jack. The branding piece is a big deal, and the ability to switch, between those, again, you have a degree of diversity, and that has really been helpful. Lloyd Hess is on the line, and Lloyd, as many of you know, runs a very large catering business, barbecue, that kind of thing. And Lloyd has a real compelling story in terms of what happened in their situation. Lloyd?
Yes. Back when this whole thing started, we were shut down. In about 8 days, we lost all of our prior events. Quite a few dollars where a potential income did not come in. So I was sitting on my back porch thinking, what the world am I going to do with 21 employees? Well, just about that time, my phone rang, and here it was a somewhat competitor of mine. But we had to do with, I was a member of a barbecue organization, a nonprofit group. And he said to me, are you interested in perhaps helping us fulfill a contract with the state? I said, absolutely, if I can. And he said, how much barbecue can you cook? Well, I said, I can cook probably 6,000 pounds a day, depending on what it is. So he said, if you can do 2,000 meals a day, they had a contract to replace food in the Pennsylvania food banks. So I said, yeah, I made 2,000 box lunches without a problem for some companies. So he called back the next day and he says, we need to increase that to 5,000. He said, do you think you can do 5,000? Well, I said, anything's possible. I said, we can probably put on a night crew if we have to. He said, good. So the next day he calls, he says, we got this contract signed, but he says, the problem is, he said, you need to do 250,000 meals. I said, oh my goodness. And how long do we have to do that? He said, a 5-week period of time, and you must complete the project. So I talked to my son, Eric, and he says, yeah, Dad, he said, we can do that. He said, we might as well do that. We're not doing nothing else. So we signed the contract, and we got into this thing. And before we got started, we found out we had to have a HACCP plan. Well, a HACCP plan is a hazardous analysis critical control point for the state, meaning as product came in here, we had to take the temperature of that product 7 times until it went back out the door for the state. This was the state contract. When the product come off the truck, we had to make sure it was the right temperature and all of that. And then the second thing is we had to label everything, every meal. So they would bring us things that apparently would have went to schools, like 40, 50-pound boxes of green beans, carrots, chicken nuggets, diced chicken, whatever it may be, and we had to create labels. But I said, how am I going to produce 250,000 labels? I said, I don't even have that capability. Well, the answer was call Amazon. Amazon's great. So we got a label maker, and just a simple thing like frozen corn, all that it is corn. That's what's on the label. But now we talk things like canned corn, and they did show up with a load of canned corn. Now there's probably 20 to 30 ingredients in that canned corn that I can't even spell or pronounce. So we had to make a label for every item, and every day we got different product. One day I opened up the truck and there was 11 skids of frozen chicken thighs. Now, I don't know if you know the quantity of 11 skids of frozen chicken thighs, but that's a lot of chicken. That was the Friday before Memorial Day. And I got a call and said they'd like to pick it up the following Wednesday. Well, we had a lot of work to do in a short amount of time to do it, but we got it done. So they would pick up, the most we'd done was average 10,000 meals a day. One day we produced 15,000 meals. The state brought in tractor trailer semi-freezers, freezer trucks and trailers. They came in every other day and fueled them up. We did roughly 52,000 pans of product. Each pan had a pound of protein, a pound of vegetables, and a pound of starch. But the supply chain became an issue then because we didn't know what we were getting. Some days we wouldn't get anything. Other days they said we'll be there Monday morning with 50,000 pounds of turkey breast, and they should have told us Wednesday because that's when it finally arrived. So that was a challenge. So some days we didn't do anything. Some days we produced 15,000 meals. Everything we did went to the Pennsylvania food banks. So we took these large boxes of product and broke it down into smaller items. So that was a challenge in itself. And I got to say, it was a good thing for my son to experience. I mean, I've never experienced anything like this in my lifetime. And I'm about ready to retire. But I think it was a very good experience for my son to learn what to do. And you talk about doing things on the fly. What an experience that was. They brought in tow motors and all this, everything we needed. But some days we would wait on aluminum pans. Some days we would wait on boxes. The other days we would wait on different items. But we did very well. Every third day they would pick up either a partial trailer load that they came from somewhere else, but they would only do full loads, which is 26 skids on a truck, which is about 25,000 meals per truck. But it was a great experience. So now if we flip to the catering side, what changed? Well, a lot has changed. We do about 30 events a week, and all of our customers, they don't want their employees to have to touch anything. So what that means is, yesterday I catered for a company, and they had some hot items and they had some cold items. Well, all these cold items have to be put in a separate box. Now, if you think about this, if they have let's just say they have a hot sandwich in one box, and now they have coleslaw, macaroni salad, or potato salad, all those things have to be put in like a 5.5 ounce container. So last week I did the feed breakfast on the farm for the Dairy Alliance group up in Leesport area. It was 1,000 meals, and we ended up using 3,000 little cups. So what I've done, I've reached out and I try to buy as many biodegradable cups as I can possibly get, rather than plastic, because we're creating a tremendous amount of trash over the course of Pennsylvania and everywhere. It's just it's really adding up. So I've been using as much of the biodegradable things as we can. Instead of styrofoam, I reached out and I got a craft brown lunchbox, which is biodegradable. And then you need a box to put the lunch boxes in that'll hold 15 lunch boxes, and that'll be cardboard. So if it's not one thing, it's another that you have to put into your prices. It's a little bit difficult, but we got it done. And that's just the way everything is. We've been doing some hot meals. We've been transporting hot meals to companies that are already proportioned, so nobody has to touch anything. I'm not sure what Christmas is going to do here, but we have to create something for that as well. We did lose a lot of we lost the ballpark business and all of that. The good side is the weddings. The wedding side have doubled. We do about 80 weddings a year. We're doing 4 weddings a weekend. The numbers are down a little bit, but that's changing. We're pretty much full for next year. So that's the good side of it. But that's what we're doing, and everything's in boxes, and everything seems to be going fine as long as that supply chain holds up for us. The little plastic packet that has the knives, forks, and spoons in, they're really hard to get. I ordered 50,000 just to have them. You got to almost triple your orders just to make sure you have this stuff in stock. And the other thing is, how does one haul 2,000 or 1,000 box lunches on an hour and a half drive? You've got to be under refrigeration. You had to buy a special trailer, refrigerated trailer, just to do that. So it has its challenges, but it's going good.
Yep.
So that's pretty
Thanks.
much what we've been doing.
Thanks, Lloyd. Again, a great study in pivoting, being flexible, coming up with some other markets. So Lonnie Kaufman is with Kaufman Fruit Farm, and Lonnie has maybe a little similar but a little bit different story. Lonnie Kaufman, you're on the line.
All right, good afternoon. Is my audio coming through?
You're good.
All right, great. So thanks for having me. It's fascinating listening to these stories. So when I look at COVID, there's obviously, I guess I would use the label levels, different levels here. So COVID has been a tremendous negative on our country and individuals, and I'm sure a lot of us know individuals that have been affected by it. So on a human level, we pray God's grace on our country. On the business level, and I guess that's the main thrust of this particular Zoom call. The business level has been fascinating. It's been adventure. It's been scary, just saying it bluntly. Going in at the beginning of 2020, Kaufman's, we had several different sales channels. And sales channels that we've had, I'd say, for several decades. One of those channels is our market, which is along Route 340 just outside Bird in Hand. And another sales channel is e-commerce. We have a website, and we sell our homegrown and homemade orchard products and a lot of other Pennsylvania Dutch foods. We sell that on Walmart.com and Amazon and eBay and a couple other websites. That's a really fast growing division of our company, and I have high hopes for that in the future. And the third sales channel we had was wholesale sales, where we would send an entire pallet of apple cider to various markets and customers in the area and at wholesale prices. So when COVID hit in March, our market, the retail brick and mortar side, it just tanked. It wasn't very nice to see, really. That's where some of the scary and the disruption part comes in. It simply tanked. There was almost no one on the roads, no tourists, and in our case, our market has a relatively high percentage of tourists that come. There's not that much of locals, or at least not as much as I wish. So that's something we're working on to try to increase the local traffic to our market. But anyway, it tanked. Sight and Sound, Tanger, all of those big touristy spots, they were closed. Almost no one in the area. I remember this past May, at some point, I drove down to our market after having lunch at home, and or maybe it was July. I'm getting my months mixed up. July, I think. And I noticed after lunch that I got to our market and actually I could not find a parking spot in front of the market. And so at that point, I took that to be a good sign because traffic was slowly coming back to the area and I had trouble finding a parking spot. That was unusual for this year. Usually that kind of scenario happens in April probably. And this year it was July. So market sales tanked. On the bright side, our e-commerce absolutely took off. We were flooded. It was absolutely amazing. So on a business level, I was really thankful that we had e-commerce infrastructure in place. We had fulfillment capability, we had products, we had sales channels, sales capability. So I was really thankful for that. E-commerce absolutely exploded, something like 6 or 8 times what we've ever done in past years. Our previous records were just smashed. And that was because everybody was shopping from home. At a 50,000 foot view, for us, e-commerce is really important. It's something I'm working on expanding as fast as I can. That was before COVID, and COVID kind of put that effort on steroids. So it remains extremely important for us and one of our primary strategic initiatives. Wholesale wholesale sales, we thought it would tank because we knew that people were having uncertainty about shopping, about being in stores. It turned out though that wholesale actually had a pretty good spring because it was interesting to watch the American consumers' behavior, where the American consumers seemed to, at least for a few months there, gravitate toward what I'll call the big box stores, so Giant and Wise and Walmart and places like that. And so that kind of filtered down to us, little guys like us, and wholesale sales went pretty well because people seemed to be buying from a perspective of stocking up. There was some panic in the air, and everybody was buying as much as they could wherever they could find it, and so that really our wholesale sales had a good spring. Going forward, COVID has really brought to the forefront this thing of healthy, nutritious food, and even the sense of I want to buy food that no other hands have touched. And so I'm hoping to bring more options to the American consumer in that regard. We started Pick Your Own Fruit this fall, and we also bought a stand in Lancaster City's Central Market as outreach to what I'll call the Lancaster City customer group. So I think there's a lot of potential for this thing of not only e-commerce, but also getting the consumer onto the farm, in our case, orchard. I see a lot of potential. So, COVID, we need to be careful to separate the levels. On a human level, it's a big tragedy with many deaths and much uncertainty and suffering. On a business level, I think there's a lot of potential to take. One of the other presenters on this call mentioned our resources here in Lancaster County. So if I think about it in that level, it seems to me there's a lot of potential to take our resources here and make it available to the American consumer, perhaps in a different way than what we've been used to doing. But we have a lot of resources here, and I hope as a collective here in Lancaster, we don't squander this, I'll say, opportunity, and not just opportunity to make money, not just on a revenue basis, but making food available in different ways, and in so helping to meet the needs of the American consumer. So that's what I see coming.
Sorry, forgot to unmute. So great stories from our local folks. I think we get kind of the landscape of what happened out there. And our idea was to use this as kind of a preface then for inviting some other people who are our friends from a variety of different organizations to comment on that. And so first, we've asked Hannah Smith Brubaker, who is the executive director of the Pennsylvania Association for Sustainable Agriculture, to talk a little bit about the produce world, to talk about how that all has weathered the storm here. And Hannah has a big perspective. And Hannah, if you're ready to go, we'll turn to you.
Okay, thanks, Scott. Thanks, everyone. Really enjoyed listening to those stories. I think before I jump into my presentation, I'll just say a few words as a farmer myself. We have a diversified organic produce and pastured livestock farm in rural Juniata County. And while I agree that the vegetable end of things has had some silver linings, boy, getting sheep processed and honestly, one of the most interesting things we ran into, we have about 1,000 laying hens out on pasture, and we just simply could not get egg cartons. we couldn't get them anywhere. And my understanding is that pulp was going into toilet paper, not egg cartons. So that actually hung us up for one of our bigger markets. So across the board, getting creative. All right. So the first thing I wanted to say, this is actually a picture of my daughter on our farm. And one of the biggest silver linings for me has been that we now have 3 college-age kids at home on the farm, and we didn't expect that. Their schools all closed down in March, and we've had this gift of an extra year with our kids who are very skilled, and we didn't expect to have their help. And so that is something I've talked to other farmers about as well. That connection with family during this time is tremendously important. I won't go too much into this, but in terms of, as an organization, what PASA was advising farms to do, you know, this is the typical OSHA hierarchy of controls. But what's really striking is one of those steps, substitution, replace the hazard, we don't have that option right now. We can mitigate the risk with PPE and social distancing, but COVID is here to stay, and it's going to be impacting our businesses for quite a long time to come. In the fields, masking and social distancing and other COVID mitigation strategies have meant complete overhauls of systems, often overly burdening the farm's workforce management and bank account. Some of these costs are ongoing, such as sanitizer, masks, and new types of packaging, while others are one-time investments in new infrastructure, such as pack house redesign for greater safety. And some of these larger investments, like overhauling packing houses, while costly, are in some cases pushing operations to realize better efficiencies and practices that may, in the long run, be good investments. You know, we know as farmers that we don't always want to make those larger investments, but in these situations we've been forced to do so, and in the long run might benefit from that. This certainly has been a season of pivoting. And while the effects of the current COVID-19 crisis are certainly having an impact on farms and farmers, it's really too soon to assess what the full impact might be. Farms that already had a direct market relationship and an online presence were able to quickly pivot. So those with shorter supply chains that are smaller, more diversified, and those that had an online presence, and in particular, those that were aggregating products. Our mantra during these times has been pre-order, prepay, pre-pack, and then delivery or grab and go. And so that's needed to be applied to all areas of vegetable farming. Just quickly show this slide from one market, Farmers on the Square, really exemplified one of the most important lessons that we had to learn in COVID, and that was to have really clear communication with our customers so they knew what to expect. And across the state, markets have really been developing some interesting tools that, again, even post-COVID, can be helpful in terms of sort of this new reality that we're facing. We've all seen this at farmers markets. Unfortunately, one of the things that farmers are facing, particularly those of us who are very diversified and have markets in different municipalities is that the regulations and interpretation of interpretation of guidelines that were coming out of the governor's office or the Department of Agriculture, farmers market boards were all interpreting those differently. And so I know for us, we go to 3 farmers markets and the rules there were completely different. So I would say over time, some of that has normalized, but it definitely added to the burden of a highly disrupted system. As Scott mentioned earlier, really the farmers that already had an online presence, and we've heard in the stories from the earlier presenters, those of us who had an online presence were able to pivot. We didn't quite perhaps anticipate the demand that would come. And we have to also accept that many farms are in rural areas where high-speed internet is an issue. And so between the technology challenges and if farmers weren't already online, many farmers have seen the inability to actually get their product to market. This is our kids preparing for CSA, but we've certainly become more of an aggregator. We've been able to move a lot of our Amish neighbors' products. They're typically not online, although a lot of Amish will hire someone to run an online e-commerce site for them. But we've had to find new ways to work together as small farms as the demand has increased. Particularly with the variable climate we also experienced this summer with a lot of drought. And so we all had to come together and see, who was able to grow what. And those of us who have been hooked into restaurants and other outlets like that of course has added additional variability. Just wanted to make one quick point before I finish up around workforce development. PASA administers Pennsylvania's only 2 labor and industry approved farm apprenticeship programs, which is the Diversified Vegetable Farm Manager and Dairy Grazing Apprenticeship Program. We've certainly seen an uptick in interest as young people are finding it hard to find jobs where they can be safe and make a living wage. And so in conclusion, shorter supply chains, typically focused on producers within the region, have proven their resilience and value at this time over longer chains. A lesson that should be remembered in the long term as we move forward and the pandemic abates. It should also be noted, though, that while many area producers saw significant upticks in the spring and early summer with regards to sales, many of these sales have plateaued or even declined in the last couple of months. Time will tell. But many farmers who were able to pivot to or within direct marketing now know that they can do it when there is volatility in the system. And anyone who's looking for any resources with regard to direct marketing as it relates to COVID are welcome to visit our website at pasafarming.org/COVID. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Hannah. Hannah's always a great resource, and I think the presentation today just underscored many of the things that we saw in the report that we have done here in Lancaster County. So I appreciate your sharing. And also, you heard from a number of our folks who, were talking about their stories, the fact that the dairy industry has had its ups and downs, and when we think about the dairy industry, we think about Jane Seabright, who is with the Center for Dairy Excellence. And Jane has a presentation now, again, talking about dairy on a little bit wider standpoint. Jane, are you ready?
Yeah, can you guys hear me good?
Yes.
So good afternoon, everyone. I have a short presentation, actually some slides that I used from another event. This first slide is just really intended to show the ripple effect of what happened after COVID hit. We had retail sales soar 38%, while food service and restaurant sales crashed as much as 98% for some processors. The school feeding programs opened up, switched milk from schools to school feeding, but participation was drastically down because kids couldn't get to the places to get the milk. And then meanwhile, cooperatives and processors struggled to find outlets for their milk. At one point in early April, we estimated that as much as 3% of the milk supply was being dumped. And that wasn't good for anyone. So dairy actually did make national news because of this, but there's a lot of silver linings and a lot of things that we learned through the COVID pandemic. And I'm going to talk a little bit about those, but this just really shows the immediate switch in the dairy industry that happened weeks after COVID. So when you look at COVID-19 and the new normal now, we still see retail fluid milk sales higher than before COVID. Food service and restaurant sales are still decreased and they're still outweighing any increase in the retail sales. However, we are seeing export sales surprisingly high, which is helping our industry quite a bit. There's a lot of concern about a second wave and what will happen if we go into another wave of shutdowns. And then processing plants continue to work through the issues of social distancing, employees out sick, modified runs, and the need for personal protection equipment. We don't have this issue as much in dairy as they do in packing plants, but certainly some of our dairy plants have employees working very closely together. They've had to change that because of COVID and other things like that. On the farm, I think that they're navigating uncertainty. The milk price has been really volatile. We always talked about the roller coaster ride in milk prices. This year, it's been more like a whipsaw. Fell really hard in April and May. It surged to all-time highs in June and July, and then it fell hard again in September. When you look at the next 12 months, we're looking at a $2 to $3 below cost of production milk price that is projected right now. We're also seeing some farms take measures to keep employees safe. We saw a dramatic need for personal protection equipment. We helped out with contingency planning. We've seen a lot of farms giving masks to their employees. And then we also have had some farms concerned about sick leave and how they work through the new requirements to if employees call in sick. We also still have some farms that are having to make adjustments in supply. There have been reductions in mandated reductions from the cooperatives. In the spring, it was as much as 15%. As much as that has softened a little bit, but we're still seeing some reductions in supply. The mandatory dumps that Andy had talked about really only occurred in the early months of COVID. Thankfully, we don't see that happening anymore. One thing we've really seen as a silver lining is the industry's ability to meet demand for families in need. Andy and George, I think, both mentioned the CFAP program and the Dairy Cares program, which has helped out individual dairy producers, but it's also moved a lot of milk into the charitable food system. CFAP supported $317 million in fluid milk and dairy donations over the summer. And the Dairy Cares program included another $5 million to support dairy and charitable food system. And then an additional $20 million for the PASS program, which the PASS program puts commodities into food banks, including dairy. The industry also stepped up to donate nearly 1 million gallons of fluid milk during the early stages of the pandemic. And if we all remember, it took a little while for some of these programs that were funding charitable food donations to come out. So in April and May, there was a escalating need for fluid milk, and the industry helped to fill a lot of that need just by working together. I think some of the things we learned from the pandemic was that our supply chain, the dairy supply chain, is very complex. And any given day, I have a dairy farm, any given day, my milk could be going to Hershey, could be going to Carlisle, it could be going for butter, it could be going to Reading for fluid milk. And that is based on orders that happened a week ago. what happened is everything shut down within a 24-hour period, and it's been likened to getting a freight train barreling down the tracks to jump from one lane to the next. And it takes more than 24 hours to change lanes and to move milk where it needs to be. We've had some round tables since the COVID pandemic with milk handlers, milk processors to talk about what needs to happen if there's another wave to prevent some of the issues that occurred in the spring. And I think the biggest thing is we just need more time. Hannah talked about the farm to table. They really had the advantage because there was a shorter supply chain and they can quickly pivot. Whereas when you have, at any given day, hundreds of truckloads on the road of milk going from one place to another, it's really hard to make that switch. The real silver lining, I think, has been, though, that I think the dairy industry, as well as all of agriculture, showed that where there's a need, there's a way. Farmers donated bulk tanks, industry donated money. There was a lot of efforts just to step up and get food to the families who needed it most. The one thing, though, I did see is it's just absolutely critical for the government and industry to be communicating in a crisis situation. And we really did see a lot of that. There was a lot of communications around if a grocery store didn't have milk on the shelves, that was detailed back to Secretary Redding. He made calls to the store. We really tried to have a concerted and collected effort to get milk where it was needed. I think one of the silver linings, though, with COVID, and if you look at my slides, you see these farmers holding up these signs. We actually did a campaign in the middle of the first wave just to remind consumers that farmers are still farming, they're still essential. And we got a huge amount of buy-in with that campaign. It went viral on social media. We distributed over 1,000 signs to farmers. And it just really showed that COVID gave us the opportunity to tell our stories. I think consumers are no longer taking their food for granted. I mean, the fear of, everybody knows what happens when a snowstorm hits, but this was really like a month-long snowstorm, and it just helped people realize that they can't take their food for granted, and it helped them connect more to where their food comes from. Another opportunity is that there's some new opportunities for farm-to-table businesses. The processors who were already had a farm-to-table business, who were doing home delivery, who were selling their products online, really actually saw their sales soar, and it's been really beneficial to those businesses. The other thing that we really saw as an opportunity in this COVID pandemic is we need more extended shelf life products. We could have pivoted more quickly and met more demand if we had more access to processing capacities that have extended shelf life capabilities. And that is something we're missing in Pennsylvania, and it's a real opportunity for us. So that was really just to give you a quick overview of some of the things that happened in dairy. So that's all I have. Thanks.
Thanks, Jane. Very good. Reminder that if you have questions, to put those into the chat box, and we'll come back to those at the very end. So one of the other themes that kind of came up in this was how do we get our cattle and other meat to processing, and that there's a shortage of that. We ask two folks who deal with this every day. One is Josh Scheinberg, who is the Eastern representative for the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture, and Jonathan Campbell, who is professor of meat science up at Penn State, to talk a bit about this. I don't know, guys, whoever wants to go first, if you would step forward.
I'll start. Just as a quick reference and a quick search I did, there are 19 total USDA inspected facilities in Lancaster County. 6 of those 19 actually harvest livestock or poultry. So Smuckers is one that does both livestock harvest as well as processing. The other 13 of those 19 either only do processing. For example, they might make ground beef or bacons or hams, or they might just be a warehouse facility, cold storage facility, which would be the Denver cold storage facility there on the turnpike. So from a meat perspective, that was probably, I am personally tired of doing radio, television, and article interviews. We did so many within the months of March and April. And a lot of times they didn't like what I had to say, which is perfectly okay. What we did, at least from a Penn State perspective and working with Dr. Scheinberg there at PDA, was to about every 2 weeks during the first two and a half months of the pandemic was to have our industry roundtables, in which it was just an open forum where we decided to find out how these folks can help each other, maybe source items that were very difficult to get. At the beginning, simple PPE was almost impossible to source because most of what was being sourced was going directly to the front lines for healthcare workers. Some of you may have seen that OSHA actually fined a packing plant out in South Dakota for failing to protect their workers because they had almost 1,300 cases within that one plant and 4 deaths. What hits home here in Pennsylvania is CDC put out a report in their morbidity and mortality weekly report that they put out back in April, that Pennsylvania led the country in total number of cases of coronavirus in meat plant workers. The problem with a headline like that is we were about the only state that was reporting almost all of our plants. So we had almost 20 plants that were reported in that case report, and other states would maybe be reporting the one plant. So that one plant in South Dakota had like 6 less cases than the whole state of Pennsylvania. And it's all really how you look at some of those numbers. Some of the biggest items that we saw that were unintended consequences was when fuel went negative, the petroleum industry went negative for the first time, and ethanol production shut down. A lot of one of the main components of ethanol fermentation and byproduct is liquid carbon dioxide. It's used for everything from individually quick freezing items to stunning hogs and chickens. So it had a major impact nationwide. That was an unintended consequence of other industries shutting down. And I think what it really brought to the forefront is how fragile the entire agricultural system is, but also how resilient it is. We see folks like Smuckers that really have stepped up in production, and they were already running at capacity, working with livestock producers as much as they possibly can. And then again, having good communication with being able to retool a facility with almost 80% of what we produce as a nation going into export and or food service. When that food service component goes away, that was really a one-way street. So we didn't have a shortage as much as a distribution issue, which was much bigger, because the ability to take something that was meant for wholesaling to what I would say food service is not what a consumer expects in a retail outlet. So having to retool a facility and the capital it would take to retool, plus the skilled workforce that is not there, again, a bigger problem from a workforce development standpoint. Those are some of the biggest issues that really caused a lot of the disruptions from a supply standpoint. Certainly the hog industry was hit much harder than the beef or poultry industry. Not that they weren't impacted by any means, but the swine industry by far impacted nationwide, because it impacted folks that say maybe only do processed meats, hams, bacon, sausage, they couldn't get some of the raw materials that they needed to produce product. Josh?
Yeah, no, thank you, Jonathan. I think you really summarized a lot of what we have been talking about ad nauseum for the last 6-7 months. And, you know, I just want to say that all the stories that were told today were very compelling. And I think it really shows, you know, the different kinds of experiences that farmers and consumers and other just the agricultural community had experienced through this whole thing. You know, the meat industry is a microcosm of a lot of what we had talked about. And although we're focusing on Lancaster County today, I can just say that from the state perspective, a lot of what, you know, we're talking about was happening statewide, if not nationwide. So, you know, just without going through a lot of what a lot of the speakers had already mentioned, I'll just kind of give a little bit of a top-down perspective for what was going on at the executive level in the PDA as all this was occurring. You know, thanks, Scott, for letting me talk today. Again, I actually recently spoke on Monday and did summarize a little bit about what PDA was doing in general, not just for the meat industry, but for the entire ag industry during, you know, the early days of the pandemic. So I won't go into a lot of that. But, you know, really it was that March, April timeframe where, you know, as Jonathan stated and others had stated here today, that we just saw a domino effect occur with plants closing one by one. You know, it was JBS, Tyson, Cargill, Empire Kosher. They all had experienced outbreaks, and this was happening very fast and quickly. And, you know, from our perspective, we were coordinating with Department of Health as much as we could to try to reach out and figure out what we could do for the meat industry. You know, most folks don't realize, but, you know, PDA doesn't have jurisdiction in USDA inspected facilities. So really up until this point, there wasn't a lot of historical, you know, touch points, relationships built up with PDA and the meat industry or the meat processing facilities that were USDA inspected. So, you know, one of the first things that I had done and others in the department is reach out to folks like Jonathan to try to get, you know, connected with a lot of the meat industry, whether it was the large processors or the very small and small processors as well. And so by and far, you know, the feedback that we were getting in those initial days was the need for PPE. I think we all, you know, experienced that, but that was the real challenge in the beginning. And, you know, we're talking about lessons learned today. Well, I think, you know, one of the things I wish we all, or at least from the state perspective, that we could have, you know, been able to assist more is provide more PPE to the industry. Now, of course, all the PPE that was available was being diverted to hospitals and emergency workers, and so it was a challenge. Eventually, the Department of Community and Economic Development, DCD, they had posted the business-to-business portal, which many of you may have used, and that I think did help a lot of processors find local and regional producers for different PPE. But that was certainly a challenge. You know, there was plenty of stories that were mentioned today, and I had talked to a lot of processors too that, you know, you heard tales of hog farmers that sold out of, you know, all of their animals overnight. You know, while on the other hand, you had small, very small slaughter plants that were booking cattle for slaughter a year out in advance. You know, this while food service outlets like schools and hotels had closed up, you know, and then grocery stores were struggling to keep up with the demand. And of course, prices for certain meat products began to rise. So, you know, there was a lot of things going on at the same time. You know, from the PDA perspective, as I said, the secretary and the department really tried to make a concerted effort to reach out and establish lines of communication with meat industry and partner with them in our state. You know, we were offering technical support where we can, really trying to connect the industry with supplies that we could, or businesses that could supply them with the things they needed, or expertise such as from folks like Johnny Campbell here today. We work closely with the federal partners. This was something that I think was a little bit new in these emergency times. Having plant visits with USDA, CDC, and other federal agencies, that's something that really hadn't happened, in any near time frame. So much of this was all happening very quickly, but was certainly a priority of the department. And even today, there are many plants that are still continuing to retrofit their plant floors, that continue to struggle with absenteeism, ensuring the health of their employees. So, while the pandemic certainly opened channels of communication with the meat industry and the PDA, which was a positive thing, I think, certainly, and it's talked about a lot, we are looking back as a department. I know the secretary has mentioned this many times. We want to learn from this experience and see what we can do better in the future. So just with the remaining time, I'll just quickly hit on this question of the small meat processing capacity, because it's something that certainly has come up a lot in this discussion and in others. Even as most, if not all, the larger meat industry has returned to somewhat normal capacity levels, we've of course talked about today that the very small meat processing industry continues to be basically maxed out. We have slaughter facilities that really cannot serve small and very small livestock farmers efficiently at this time. And so, what we're doing from the state level, we're really taking a concerted effort to examine this issue, and the secretary of the department is serious about lending our support to bolster Pennsylvania's small meat processing industry. Many of you might be aware of the small meat processing grant program that was available through the 2019 Farm Bill. Right now, we're still waiting to see how the budget shakes out in November, but we're hoping that type of program will be available again. And that's at least one example of something that was available before the pandemic, and we're certainly looking to make that available again, if not with more funding. Starting a slaughter plant, as many of you know, is expensive. It's generally a multi-million-dollar investment. There's many factors to making it viable. Whether there's a ready supply of livestock or poultry to maintain the business. Having a well-trained and skilled workforce is critical, and it's a challenge throughout the state, especially in the meat industry. So while we're certainly looking to use grant programs like the small meat processing grant to bolster the small and very small meat processing capacity, I think there's a lot of other areas that we need to explore within that workforce development, and just within understanding our meat industry in Pennsylvania better. I've had a lot of conversations about custom exempt processing. It's something that a lot of consumers and industry members don't understand a lot, because the regulations are difficult to understand, and they're different between meat products and poultry products. This is something we can talk about for a long time here, but so education might be a big part of this too. To close, I think, this is an ongoing conversation like we're having today. We're looking back, we're exploring to see what we can do. The Department of Agriculture is seeking your input in this area. My role as the Eastern Regional Director is to directly connect with stakeholders like yourself on today, everyone that was in discussion today. So I'm looking to hear from you. We want to hear your feedback. We want to learn from these experiences, and we want to do what's best for the Pennsylvania agriculture community. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. And again, I think that we need to work collaboratively at doing this at the local and state and the federal level as we look forward. So our final speaker is Claudia Schmidt, who is professor of agriculture economics at Penn State. She has a really interesting twist on all this with talking about agritourism, which of course was a part of the topic earlier. So at this point, Claudia, can we turn it over to you? You might
Now
be.
you can hear me,
There you go.
right? All right. Um, all right, so I'll talk about the fun part. And since I'm an economist, I'll start with a graph. I just want to highlight a little bit how important agritourism has become. Using different data sources, we compared agritourism revenue increases with other out-of-home leisure activities like entertainment, arts, and spectator sports. And the take-home message here is just that agritourism really has experienced a sharp increase in popularity, and that started way, way before COVID. Here are the numbers from the Ag Census. Again, it's just framing the issue on how many operators received income from agritourism. So you in Lancaster County are leading when it comes to the number of agritourism operators in Pennsylvania. But as you know, the Ag Census only asks about if you do farm or winery tours, hayrides, hunting, and fishing. So I actually think the number is much higher because there are a lot of other activities that can be included here. Here I'm showing how the number of farms that receive income from agritourism has changed from the last census to the most recent one in 2017. So we can see that Lancaster stayed about the same, just 7 more farms reported income from those activities. Bucks County, on the other hand, lost 33 farms, so that's a different story. So agritourism development has been pretty solid in Lancaster County, but there hasn't been a big increase in farms reporting, and I wonder how COVID will change that. So now what's been happening with COVID, I just want to summarize what we have heard before and what we've heard in extension. The lack of employees really has been an issue because of international travel restrictions. There's a lack of seasonal labor that has hit a number of people. And I think it's interesting that we haven't talked about labor today, really, beside the meat processing issues. Local labor, a lot of people told us, is really hard to find. Extension educators have told me that a number of operations have issues with finding permanent staff, for example, bakers or front store staff, and just getting people to help with the organizations of UPIC. There are a couple of reasons for that. It's partly due to unemployment payments, which provided, in a way, a disincentive for some people to search employment, but we really need to look at further research on that. And employees are concerned about getting COVID and then quit, and some also may have at-risk family members at home. And so a lot of people, farmers have reported that revenue has increased, but costs have as well. So as we've talked about, many producers had to switch to an online ordering system. We have to pay for more supplies for disinfection and PPE. And another thing that many producers found distressing is the constant research you have to do in order to comply with all the new recommendations that are coming out. So looking ahead, what can we expect? Here are the results from a Nielsen survey that asked consumers why they're not returning to premises. And I know this mainly refers to bars and restaurants, but I think we can also see how this can apply to on-farm experiences. So they ask questions in 3 categories: the anxiety that consumers might feel, the precautions taken by the premises, and then the experience. And we can see that the main reason that customers stay away from premises is not that they feel that they will have a diminished experience, and it's really all about feeling safe. Another survey, a bigger survey, asked about what encourages consumers to visit premises, and the major points are here: outdoor seating areas, staff wearing protective equipment, and fewer tables, so less people. And looking ahead, I think that more flexibility is needed also for planners. They should be open to changing consumer demands. We need more space for customers to feel safe. I think everyone agrees that some form or level of COVID is here to stay. But it's really just not about feelings and perceptions for your customer. It's the last thing you want to do is for your operation to show up as a hotspot in the news. So we need to look more at novel design ideas like pop-up farmers markets, more space to spread out, open air farm cafes. And with the cold season coming up, I also think that it's necessary to make more investments for some people. That's the case. So create outdoor seating space if you haven't done so, with the heaters and blankets. And make sure that staff is wearing their PPE because your customers are seeing that. And while I talk about agritourism, I want to give a shout out. I want to make sure that you're aware that we expanded Penn State's Farm Finder map to include agritourism operations. And check it out and make sure that your operation is on it and that we have the right information. The contact information is on the PA Farm Finder site. And that's my presentation. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Claudia. This is really good. And for those of you who are involved in agritainment, Claudia is a wealth of information on this, and I think can provide some research to back up what you may need to know a little bit more about. I do think that what you mentioned in terms of the workforce issue, it is something that we have in our report, and it's critically important. I mean, this was one of the issues that was out there for the industry before COVID. It was exaggerated during COVID, and it's going to continue to be an issue, you know, as we go forward. So I think we'll be hearing a lot more about that. So again, thank you to all the presenters. There are a couple of questions in the chat box. Jen Reed Harry asked, and this is particularly for people in the dairy world, based on what you have observed pre-COVID through today, have you noticed any attitude changes in your customers in regards to a greater awareness or appreciation of where food comes from? Or customers asking questions to learn more about the origin of their food, that kind of thing. I mean, I guess we could ask that to any of the presenters. Is that something that we're seeing, or any progress there? You can open your mics. You can just take yourself off of mute.
This is George on our from Oregon Dairy. From the retail perspective, in the last number of years, more or less, a little while, people were much more interested in where their food comes from. But this has really heightened that for us as people come, especially when we were running short and had to limit things. People became keenly aware that it is actually a perishable product and it might not be at their fingertip disposal at all times. So the short answer is yes, people are more interested now. Whether that'll wane soon, I don't know, but there was a lot of interest in food production and where the food comes from.
Yeah, I think Lonnie Kaufman mentioned the fact that people are interested in healthy food.
And very much so, and also local food.
Right.
Yeah, Scott, this is Lonnie at Kaufman's. Certainly concur with that. I think in our experience, I don't think COVID has brought new perspectives from the consumer, but more it's been an amplification of the trends that were already existing. And those trends were toward healthy nutrition, wanting to be on the farm, direct from farmer type of thing.
Yep, that's good. And I mean, long term, as we begin to assess where this is going to take us, that's probably a good trend. And that the more, it may actually give us some notion in terms of our marketing themes and such, things that we might want to really concentrate on as we think about going forward. Good. Anybody, any other comments on that? Here's another comment from Mike Peachy. This is Mike. If you know Mike, Mike's an accountant. So this is an accountant question. We describe the supply and distribution chain as fragile. It seems fragile because of how efficient the chain and channels have become. Things like just-in-time delivery, not having enough egg cartons, only making them when we need them. So question for the future, does the food system need to build more slack into the chain to avoid potential disruptions? If so, it seems that means being maybe less efficient with resources, which is counter to the way businesses seek to operate. What do you all think about what's the right balance, I guess, is what Mike is asking, that, if we're so tight and we're so just in time, does that cause some of the problems that we experienced in the last 6 months?
I think this really relates more to the meat industry than anything else, but I think Claudia's slide on flexibility is the biggest key there. When you look at a system that only has one-way streets, that's a problem, and it lacks flexibility, which is the real issue, and applaud her for putting that on her slide.
I also, it's a fine balance, because the more inventory you have, the more it costs you, and these costs will be passed down to the consumer.
Good. Any other comments?
Yeah, Scott, this doesn't directly apply to that, but it does apply to flexibility. Is decades ago, if you built a large egg production complex, you would make it just for retail packaging or just for egg products from a broken egg. And in the last, I'd say, 10 to 15 years, large complexes have put in both kinds of equipment. Most of that was due to a pricing situation where they could get more money for a broken egg one time and more money for a retail egg another time. So it wasn't a COVID situation or a supply chain situation, but when they build a new complex, they build in the flexibility to go to multiple markets rather than just a single market.
Yeah, that's really helpful. So there may be some structural things out there that people will be looking at going forward. Good, thank you all. Any other comments? This is on the one about flexibility in the supply and distribution chain. So another question in the chat box. Several people mentioned about HACCP and how HACCP rules and regulations can slow things down and be an issue. Mike Peachy again is suggesting maybe some kind of temporary waiver of HACCP. Those of you who are involved in that, what do you think about that? Is that a solution, not a solution? We still have to worry about food safety and humane treatment of animals and that sort of thing. Perspective from some of you who are involved. I guess this is particularly in the meat end of things as well.
Oh,
Not only,
go ahead.
Not only in the meat industry, when we did these large meals for the state,
right?
I would have thought that we could have got an exemption for a expiration date and some of the other things, but we spent as much time on HACCP, probably 2 hours to 3 hours a day just on paperwork, and we have to keep those papers for 3 years, even though there was a 90-day expiration date on those products.
Yeah, that's a great illustration of some of the issues.
And I'm really glad you said that, because that is the reason why a lot of custom or retail processors stay custom or retail processors. They do not have the ability, nor do they want the headache to have to deal with keeping track of all that paperwork. And so that is a real problem. I'm not a huge fan of waiving HACCP regulations. I think it works. I think you can look at the Pathogen Reduction Act from 1996 to 2020 and see that we are approaching zero. I don't think we'll ever get to 0 cases of foodborne illness associated with pathogens. Certainly the allergens issue has risen to the top, but for those of you that aren't aware, HACCP deals with primarily 3 basic HACCPs: microbiological or those bacteria that make us sick, as well as viruses. Chemical, so it could be an allergen, and then physical hazard, so plastic, foreign material that may be incorporated either into the raw material or in horrible cases in the finished product. So the systematic approach to be able to address those hazards, and these are, keep in mind, reasonable and foreseeable hazards, as well as regulatory hazards. So some are different. And then building a food safety system around that is the minimum requirement to be USDA inspected from a meat perspective. And then with the FSMA regulation, you can call it FSMA, you could call it numerous types of acronyms all we want to, but the Food Safety Modernization Act and HACCP are basically the same thing. If you take both courses that I teach, they are almost exactly the same. And the premise in those is almost exactly the same. So I don't think it would solve the issue, in my opinion, which is why we created our butcher program at Penn State that will launch January 11th, 2021. We're in the process of having that certified through Labor and Industries as a first certified apprenticeship for butchering in the United States. No other country has that. Nobody can do that. If you go to Germany and you want to open a meat business, you have to go to school. It's that simple. You can't just say, I think I'll be a meat processor because my insurance job didn't work out. Well, that's the positive side of capital trade and what we have in our democracy here. But the downside is, learning some of those scientific basis and techniques for what you're doing passed down in a certified program doesn't exist.
Great. Thanks to all of you for sharing. We're a little bit past our time, and I just wanted to ask any other questions for the good of the order. So just to tell you, I think the commitment from the Lancaster County Agriculture Council is that we plan, I guess one of the questions we had is that initially when we started talking about what could we do, so many people said, well, that's all stuff that happens at the state and national level. And the more we get into this, the more we realize that that's not necessarily the case. There are things that we can do at the local level in relation to some good planning, some advocacy for some of the gaps that we've seen locally, and really just some other kind of programming that actually might lead to the competitive advantages that we have here in Lancaster County. So the Ag Council will be pursuing those things. Don't be surprised if you get an email saying, hey, we're going to have another conversation. Would you join us? But this has been incredibly helpful. This is it's a great teeing up of some of the issues that we've raised in the report. And as I said, this is being recorded. I think I need to do one more thing, which is to give credit for our sponsors. Hang on. And Mid-Atlantic Farm Credit was our sponsor, and we appreciate their support on this. Again, a recording of this session will be available on the website. Give us a couple of days to get our feet on the ground again and to get this placed. But gosh, I just think this was an incredible session. And I thank all of you for being a part of it. And, we'll see where this takes us down the road, but expect to hear from us. And can we all just, I know it's online, but can we do one of these? Yay.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, and we'll be in touch.